Hey everyone, I'm Gracie, and welcome to Grace of a Military Child podcast. The world should know how unique military children are. We may look like normal children on the outside, but we go through some pretty extraordinary circumstances that shape us to the leaders we are today. That is the sole purpose of this podcast, to share our stories to the world. Welcome to the podcast, Xenia. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about any of your earliest memories of being a military child. And we spoke with Xanadu a little while ago and heard a little bit about your dad. And so tell me anything of that nature.
Okay, so my dad got out of the military while we were still pretty young. He was a buck sergeant at the time, and then we relocated from Wordsmith down to Youngstown Air Reserve Base. So he still worked on a military installation. But one of the days we were down in the garage and just moving stuff around, and there was a whole bunch of stuff from Cairo, Egypt, and I'm like, oh, this is cool, like turbans and models of the sphinxes, and like, I don't know if you know this, but before we had all this cool technology, there were these photo slides, and you had to put them in a projector, and it would click over, and you could see it. And we didn't have the little clicker thing, but he had all of these into a box, all these pictures into a box. And I was looking through them, and you could see the pyramids of Egypt. And I'm like, whoa. And I remember thinking, how cool. I'm like, I'm never going to get to go there. I'm never going to be able to do something that cool. Like, and I still don't even know what he was doing there. I'm like, he's told me kind of ish what it is. And I don't know if it's declassified or whatever it is, but yeah, it was definitely one of the coolest things. He's like, yeah, we were just landing C5s. And I'm like, you can do a quick Google search and you're like, where at would you be landing these monsters of aircraft? So
yeah,
it was pretty cool. I think it was pre-Desert Storm 1, before Desert Storm was Desert Storm. So I think it was around that era. And I was like, man, that is like cool stuff. Like, that is cool stuff. I actually wore one of the head turbans that he had gotten, and I wore it for Halloween or some float thing. I don't remember. It was like such a long time ago.
Yeah.
But that was one of the cooler things that I remember seeing, like my first intro of, wow, like my dad's just not a firefighter. Like, wow, like he's actually gone and seen the world. Wow. Like, I grew up in a small town, so seeing something that profound is, amazing, even now as an adult.
Yeah. And, it's not often that you go to places like Egypt or some of these cool parts. So you have to, kind of try and, pictures, memories to remember those times. And then even seeing it as a young child, being like, oh my gosh, you got to go to Egypt.
Yeah, I remember I was like, why do you have these? And it was just kind of set back and, behind a bunch of his woodworking things. And I'm like, why don't you have these out? These are cool. Like, what are these? And I just picture these little things. I'm like, what are these? And I'm trying to find the light to like look underneath them. But they were the coolest things, the coolest things.
Yeah. For sure. So Xanadu said that your dad was in the Air Force. And so what kind of places besides Egypt did he get to go? Did you remember any stories he told you, or?
I remember him getting an Arctic survival bag, like a sleeping bag. And I was like, why do you have this? And he was like, oh, when I went, when we deployed or they sent us over to the sand, it gets cold at night.
Yeah.
And like, but it's the desert. For me, in a young child's mind, I'm like, this is outrageous. You're gonna sweat to death. So it was very, like, I don't even know the word to explain it, as far as just wild, like bonkers. Like I couldn't wrap my tiny little 5-year-old brain like around this concept of a huge sleeping bag to go to the desert or in the desert. I'm like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Fast forward years and years and years into my Air Force career, and I go to deploy, and they're giving me cold weather gear and all this other kind of stuff. I'm like, why are they giving me this? Well, it does get cold there. It does snow. So that's crazy. And it gets, even when it's hot in the daytime, at nighttime it gets so much cooler because the sun goes down that you're cold. I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes sense now. Like a light bulb. Bing!
Yeah.
Like I get it.
Yeah, it took so many years to be able to figure out exactly why you needed a cold sleeping bag instead of, a lighter one.
Funny. It was funny for sure. And I remember telling him, I'm like, yeah, I'm getting ready to go to Afghanistan. And they said it's going to be, 6 months, but it could extend. And I've got some training to do beforehand. So they actually had to keep my dogs longer. So that was one of the things. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Please don't get rid of my dogs. Yeah, it was really, really funny. What else did so he was like, oh, make sure you make friends with the firefighters. They have washers and dryers, because depending on some other places that you go, they don't have those amenities. But if you're there where there's firemen, then they have those amenities because they have to be able to wash their stuff. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's good to know.
Good to know.
Tips and tricks to stay clean. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Do you remember going to the Air Force base that your dad was working at even when he was out of the military?
Yeah. So the smell of a fire station is very nostalgic for me. I know that sounds very, very weird because it's right on the flight line, but even going into any fire station, especially if I miss home and I just take it smells like rubber and jet fuel.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, they're like, are you okay? I'm like, no, I just miss my dad. So that's what he does. It smells like him.
Yeah.
And and the big tires, like all these fire trucks have these great big huge tires, and I'm just like, whoa, they're so big. Like these fire trucks are so big. And then they had, their guard unit and reserve units. So every once in a while, there'd be people walking around in uniforms and the kind of stuff. And trying to learn that's not what he did anymore. I'm like, then how come you're here, but you're not wearing a uniform? How come they have to wear uniforms? You're not wearing uniforms. So it's very difficult to grasp that as well. So that was one of the things. I'm like, so you work on an Air Force base, but you're not in the Air Force? I don't understand.
Yeah, because he was, and then, transitioning into a DOD job, then you don't do that anymore. You have your one role that you play, and that's
exactly.
Do you remember wanting to go? Because when I talked with Xanadu, she wanted to go to.
Yes, I love to go to the Air Force base. Everybody was so nice, and they had the coolest toys and amenities, and you're like, whoa. And one of the funner memories that I have is they set up this great big huge long tarp, and there was in one of the bays they had this great big huge long hill, and they set the fire hose down on it. So there was a hose running down, and it was this giant slip and slide, and all the kids that were there for their shift were there, and we were, everybody was grilling out, and the kids were slipping and sliding, and all kinds of fun stuff. And even being in one of the cop cars, they let us get over the megaphone, and you could hear yourself. You're like, hey, pull over. Going everywhere. So that was fun. Yeah, it was definitely really, really cool experience to do.
Yeah, because even though, you were still technically, a military kid, but you didn't get those experiences of being, moving and what a normal military kid would, but you were still able to hang around and be a part of the activities that were happening on base.
Yeah. So it was nice because, he worked 24 on and 24 off. So, you know, sometimes he would be gone for a
Right.
while. We're like, well, I feel like he's been gone forever. Is Dad working all day today? Or when is he going to come back? And then, every once in a while, if he came home on a weekend, so if he was coming home on a Saturday morning, he would stop by the donut shop on his way home, and we would get donuts like that from down the road. Yeah, so we're like, yay! So that was always fun.
Yeah, I'm sure. Who wouldn't want donuts?
I know, I love donuts. Even now, I'm like, oh, I love donuts. Yeah, so that was definitely cool. But one of the things now, thinking about it, when 9/11 happened and my mom came to the school to come and get us, and my older sisters, Alana was already in the Army, and we were like, what's going on? And they shut the base down and they weren't allowed to leave and they were held over. And so it was just like a world of panic.
Yeah.
Because we're like, what's gonna happen? And then they're seeing these planes fly over and they're getting called out to the flight line because one of these aircraft that are in the air is not going to be able to land where they need to be. So they have to go out. And so, hearing the concern in his voice was definitely scary.
Yeah, I'm sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember being scared for Elina at the time too?
Yes. So I remember I was a cheerleader and there was a basketball game and one of the moms came up to me and they're like concerned because like, oh, what's going to happen? Is your dad okay?
Yeah.
And all these other types of things. And I'm like, yeah, we're just really concerned for Lina.
Yeah.
And, Lina's out there. Our friend Bobby was out there and like a couple other people. And like, I feel like her whole class just went to some part of the military. And so then the mom, this grown woman, starts crying. She goes, oh my God, I forgot all about Selina. And I'm just in the middle, of this high school with this sobbing mother. And I'm trying not to cry. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, it's scary to see adults cry when you're still a child, right? And you're just, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then technology wasn't what it's like today. So you couldn't just call on the cell phone. You couldn't just FaceTime. You couldn't just Skype. So a lot of it was just snail mail and just waiting to hear back where she was at, what they were doing, who they were with. And so waiting for that, where it's going to happen. So that was definitely scary.
Yeah,
very, very scary. Yeah. And I mean, I can't even remember how many deployments she's been on. She was gone for like, we got to go to one. By the time she came back, I had graduated high school and I was in my first year of as a freshman. And we got to take like freshman courses together. And then it was like she got to take one course one semester and then she was gone again. And I'm like, oh, like it was kind of like it sucked.
Yeah.
it just sucked all over again. I'm like, oh man. So she missed my graduation. Yeah, like stuff that sisters are normally like, oh, we're getting ready and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh man. So that was difficult for sure.
Sure. How old were you when Zelina joined?
So she joined when she was 17 because she had to get a written waiver to go in. So that would have put me at 15.
Yeah.
15 years old. And then I was probably 16 when she left because it was already September and I had already started my sophomore year of school, or junior year of school. So I was starting my junior year of school. And I was yeah, just a teenager, just like 15, 16-year-old teenager, just like wondering where my sister was at and
Yeah.
waiting for the letters and waiting for the letters. And you're just like, oh, I actually still have um, a casing that she had, and she wrote me a letter and she put it in there. And so I still have the letter and I still have the casing from the bullet. And I was like, oh, this is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
That's
really cool.
incredible.
I still have a lot of her letters in one of my big tote gorilla cases. I still have that,
Yeah.
a bunch of her letters from overseas and her stories and stuff like that. So it's really cool. I try not to read them because they're like, you
Yes.
just think about some of those things and you're like, wow, I'm so glad she's alive.
Yeah, for sure. I even
Yeah.
a letter that dad wrote me when he was away, you know, I cried reading that one at first, like the very first time I read it, I cried. And then reading back through it, I still cry. Like it was just a basic, like it was like a one page, like not even a full page letter, but like I still cried because it's those memories for
Yeah.
sure.
It brings back that like, oh, like you're back in that setting and you're back in
Right.
that doubting and denying. You're like, I don't know what's going to happen. You keep seeing on the news, and oh my goodness, the news was just constant everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere, everywhere. Like, oh, another IED, another explosion, another, attack, and all these kind of things. And it's just, you're like, oh, and you keep looking back. You're like, where's she at? Which part is she at? Like,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like when I was in high school, they didn't show geography like they do today. That's half of the world. So to see the other half of the world, I'm like, where is she? Like, what is this? Is that it? I'm like, oh no. It's a different camp, or something would happen at one of the camps that she was at, or one of the FOPs that she had just left. So she was going to, or always, it just seemed like she was always just in the nick of time missing it, right? Just
Yeah.
missing it. And you're just like, oh, but then, that's the aftermath of everything, and having to wait to see how close she was, right?
Yeah.
This time by how close, this time how far, like the lead times of these disasters and catastrophes that are happening, and you're just waiting like, oh, that was too close, things like that. So yeah, it definitely makes you grateful, even though she's a pain in the butt now. I'm very
Yes.
grateful.
Yes, for sure. Do you have any letters that say don't join the military? Did she tell you that at all?
Never. She actually tried to get me to join the army because the army had a sign-in bonus. And I was in school, like in college, and I was like, nope, I'm too smart for the army.
Xanadu
Yeah.
had said she remembers letters that say don't join the military, don't join the military. And so that's one of the reasons she joined. And she was like, okay, my sister's telling me not to join, so guess what I'm going to do? And she joined.
Yeah, I actually joined after Xanadu joined the Air Force, 6 months. So she left in February, I think. When she was 20, she turned 21 in basic and boot camp. And then I joined August of 2006. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you think
and I
both
saw
of
right? Go ahead.
Do you think both of your sisters joining made you want to join as well?
So I remember going to Xanadu's graduation. And so I've been to both of them. I went to Zelana's and I went to Xanadu's. And I remember watching Xanadu walk down the bomb run and how sleek and uniformed everything was.
Yeah.
And I was like, piece of cake. I can do this. Piece of cake. Like, nothing to it. And then like a few weeks later, I came back and I went to the same recruiter, Sergeant Largent, and good old Jeffrey Largent, and took the ASVAB test. And obviously I scored higher than her. Right? Like, I obviously scored higher than her. yeah, and then I signed for 6 years because I wanted to outrank her faster. And that was the thing. I was like, how can I outrank her sooner? Like, I need to know these things. So he's like, well,
Yes.
and I had only planned to do 6 years. I'm like, I'm only going to do 6 years and then I'm going to get out. I'm going to do 4 years and then I'm going to get out and do the rest of my time as a guard or reserve. And then have a degree and done with the military. Thank you. And I'm on my
Yeah.
way to living my best life.
So it's basically a competition, more or less.
Yes. Yes, very much so. So Zelina and I are both E7s now. And Zelina is at 20 years and I'm at 14 and 9 months. So I'm like, ooh. And now it's like, so is she going to retire? Is she going to try to get E8? I got to get E8 before she does. Like, oh.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm like, do I get E8 just to say that I made it and she's didn't? It's healthy. It's healthy sibling rivalry for sure. It's a healthy competition.
Yes.
But I definitely lean on her a lot as a female military woman, as a sister, as a mentor. I definitely rely on her a lot. I really do. I I call her all the time and I'm asking her, certain scenarios, like I have a friend who this is happening to. What do you think? And so even though we're in different branches, the senior NCO corps, like all of those, they run together, right? There's still that bridge that goes there. So I really do heavily rely on her experience.
Yep.
110%. 110%. Yeah.
And even like the different branches, a lot of it is different. There's a lot of differences, but it's still there's a lot of similarities through it too.
So the camaraderie, for sure. Like the camaraderie. So,
yes.
Air Force to Air Force, we have camaraderie. And then, when you go to a joint environment, you have that camaraderie. And nobody can say anything about a branch who's never served, who's never been in, because they don't understand it. Like, it's like, I can pick on my sister, but you can't pick on my sister, like you need to stop it. Yeah. So it's one of those, it's very cool and unique, and you meet a lot of people who you would never meet. You get to enjoy different cultures that you normally would never be able to be immersed in. And it's really a different type of family, like an extension of what you have. So I have obviously two sisters, but in the military, I've gained more sisters, like more brothers and sisters, and definitely people who've been like father figures when I have been, like in the middle of nowhere, stranded. I'm like, man, this is terrible. Like, what am I going to do? Right. And then you have this person who's like, they're still your supervisor or a mentor of some way, but they've been in a little longer and they kind of like talk you off the ledge, right? Essentially is what they're doing. They're like, come on back.
Yes.
Let's sit down and talk about this. Let's rationalize it. And they end up caring for you, in a way like a father or a mother would. It essentially is what happens. So then you still stay in contact with those people and they still check in on you. They still, congratulate you. They still tell you to keep your head up. They still, continue to try to mold you and shape you and to give you that extra push when you don't think you can.
Yeah, for sure. And even, from like a military child's perspective, like anyone would do that. Zelina is like my second mother. Like, wow. I mean, she literally took care of us for a month, but like she still is a mom to me. Like she'll still like, if I'm out of it, she'll still snap me back into place. Like she's not scared to do that. So yeah.
She's not scared to do that for anybody.
That's so true. Yes. Yeah. So you spoke on the different cultures. Do you remember certain places that you felt more at home or more, I guess?
Wow. So Langley was my first duty station, and my younger sister was stationed at Pope. So it was nice. It was only 3.5, 4.5 hour drive. So
Right.
a lot of the times I would come back to my house on like a Thursday or a Friday, and my sister would be at my house. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. Or they were planning a trip down to Myrtle Beach, and so I would drive down and go and pick up my sister. They wanted to go to Savannah. It was just they would come. It was just so much back and forth with us too that it was very nice. It was a nice soft introduction, I guess, like a
Yeah.
soft opening to the Air Force. So my first time being very much away from home was when I got stationed in Japan. So that was different. But I really enjoyed that culture, and that was probably my favorite assignment and probably where I felt most at peace.
Right.
Hawaii was my next assignment. I was at Hickam for a while. And even though I really enjoyed it, it still wasn't the same. I had a lot of challenges there. And a really good mentor who really did get me out of my comfort zone. So it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
Very much a lot of work. I made 2 ranks there, so I'm very blessed that I had Hickam as an assignment. But it was a lot, yeah. And then Mina, I never felt at home. I never got in a rhythm. That's in North Dakota. I just never felt like that was my jam. And then here we go, 17 months later, I'm in Randolph in San Antonio, and I have family here that's extended family, and I get to hang out with my cousins. And normally I would only be able to come back to San Antonio for a TDY and be there for like a few days. So now I'm here permanently for a while, right? Permanent.
Yeah.
Ish,
Ish,
in some
kind
form
of.
of permanency. And so it's nice to reconnect with that side of my family who I don't get necessarily able to see a lot. And
Yeah.
they're very, very welcoming, obviously. And when are you coming over for lunch? When are you coming over for dinner? It's very nice. So I would say probably Langley, and here, San Antonio, have been the most that I felt at home for sure.
Yeah. And I think San Antonio, like we lived on the Army base, Fort Sam. And so, but I think just San Antonio in general is like home, just like the culture, the people there, they're all so nice, and the food and everything.
And the food.
And the food.
Top notch.
Yes.
Yes. And it's such a huge military hub, right? In the Air Force, we call it the gateway to the Air Force because that's where you come into the Air Force, right? Like you go through your basic training. COVID has switched things a little bit, but if you're in the Air Force, you've gone to Lackland. But then outside of Lackland, there's it's spanning the entire state of Texas is just a whole array of different branches, and even your neighbors are retirees or have served in some capacity. So it's really nice. It's really nice to just have that extended part of family there. Like it's really nice. I agree though. The food is
yeah, you can't replicate it. We try to find like good Tex-Mex Mexican food, even in Florida, like it doesn't.
Yeah. It's probably more like Cuban, Dominican, Puerto Rican food down there. Yeah. It's different.
For sure. So, was there a specific reason that you chose the Air Force over the Army?
Ooh, yes. We get paid the same, but I feel like our quality of life is way better. Oh gosh, I see sometimes we do collaborative exercises, TDYs, and all these types of things, and the Army is out there just grunting, staying in tents, and you're like, why? There's a hotel right here. Why? Yeah. I would say you are treated as an adult earlier, and you have that responsibility earlier in your career than you would be as a soldier. Like a soldier, they really, really do like break it all the way down to you're a baby, you're a child, you have to learn how to walk before you can run. And in the Air Force, we still expect you to, by the time you get to the Air Force, you already need to know how to walk and, crawl and walk. By this time you're running and they're running fast. So we expect you to be able to run, and now you need to learn how to run fast. And we're going to show you how to run fast. Follow my lead and let's grab my hand and take it like a small child, and we're running. And you're just like, almost 15 years later, I look up and I'm like, oh my God, I'm still running.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like after talking with Xanadu too, there's so many just little differences, especially she said she remembers an experience where she went to chow with Lina and she didn't clean up after herself.
Yeah.
And you have to clean up after yourself in the Army. Like you don't just leave your dishes everywhere.
And that is, so the first time we all were together after we had all went to basic training and all that kind of stuff, we were, I think we were in New York or something like that where my parents lived. We had eaten dinner, and me and my sister got up, me and my younger Xanadu got up, we left our plates there. And that's not how we were raised to do that. But
sure.
The Air Force had me and Xanadu, we left our plates at the table and everybody else cleaned up. And my mom, I remember her like, who left at the table? And Zelina gloated and she was like, well, notice it's the 2 Air Force members that did that. Yeah. It's funny. And I remember, I don't know which deployment. I was already in the military. I was in Virginia. Lana was deploying out of Pope and or Bragg, and I drove down to see her, and she couldn't get in my car to drive to go somewhere. And she's like, "We're not allowed in POVs. We're not allowed in POVs because we could get hurt." So they had to walk everywhere. So I'm like, "Oh, this is ridiculous." So I drove, and I drove next to her, and Whitney Houston. I Want to Dance with Somebody was on, and I turned my radio up super loud, and I was riding next to her, like screaming the song to her.
Oh my God.
Right before her deployment. Yeah, it was one of the best times. Experiences, because very rarely does the younger sibling get to embarrass the older sibling. Usually
it's the other way around. Yeah.
You get it.
I'm the older one, so yeah. She's had some moments, but I try not to let it get to me as much now. But yes, for sure.
Oh, that's funny.
Are there any experiences that you had as a military child that I guess translate or influence how you've handled certain situations in the military yourself?
You can do anything. Discipline. I never knew why my dad liked things in a particular manner. And now fast forwarding to, I like things done a certain way and I want them done a certain way. And it's very difficult for me to accept that other people don't do things the same way I do.
Yeah.
Why are you doing it that way? That's not how I want it to be. And 100%. I remember folding towels. Towels had to be folded a certain way. And then when I went to basic, that's exactly how we folded our towels. I'm like, man, I'm perfect at my life. A lot of things. The need to tell people, not to tell people, right, everything that you're doing. And I never understood that. I thought that was, an overprotective parent. But that is the nature of the military.
Sure.
I'm in the military. What do you do? I do X, Y, and Z. And then it's kind of like vague and you leave it vague. And where are you at? What are you doing? Social media has made it incredibly difficult for that kind of stuff, especially with geotagging. So it's one of those things that need to still self-express, but what part of self-expression do you hold tight to yourself? So definitely how to keep a secret.
Yeah, that's like the military. You see the outside life, but you know, the inside life, especially from an outsider, like a civilian, like you see what you see on the outside, but then what's really going on, you don't see much of.
Exactly, like what you're exposed to, like the level of responsibility that they automatically put on you without you fully knowing why. You know something, but you don't know why, and it's having that trust in the system to just do it, right?
Yeah.
It's not blind, but it's trusting and confident. It's that your wingmen, our soldiers, will always battle with you, right? And they'll come alongside you. Yeah, it's different. It's not for everybody.
No.
I never thought it was me either, but I say that and I never thought about joining the military ever. So here we are.
Did you have a specific goal you had in life when you were in high school and going to college? Or
Man, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I was going to be a doctor and business. My first degree that I was going for was business marketing and language. And I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I'm terrible at business. I don't like doing the widgets and all this stuff, money marketing and the market world is terrible. I don't like this. I don't want to do this. So what is a different business that's not corporate? So I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. So I did want to do something medical. I just didn't know what. So that was like my goal. And when I went to the recruiter, I was like, people will always be getting sick. What can I do? And so my first job in the military was aerospace physiology. And I was like, oh, that's cool. What do you do? And it's still medical, but not quite medical. And you get to, jump out of planes and go to combat schools and all this other kind of stuff. I'm like, sounds high speed. That's what I want to do. I didn't know that it wasn't like being a doctor or a nurse or a dentist or a dental hygienist. It's very different. It's a different way. You're still taking care of people, but not in that same sense. So it was weird.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A culture shock for sure. A culture shock. Yeah.
I mean, medical field, because that's what I'm going into. I'm going into the medical field in either an athletic training capacity or an orthopedic capacity. We'll see how far I get. But
very cool. Very cool.
Yes. So there's so many different branches of the medical field is what I figured out because, I grew up in a hospital setting. So I knew kind of the ins and outs of a hospital. And I was like, okay. The only really thing I noticed, though, is anything medical, you were a surgeon. Like, that's what my perception of it was. And I was like, I'm not being a surgeon. That's not happening. I cannot perform a surgery. And so, there's other sides to it. There's like the physical therapy side of it, athletic training, and all of these other things that don't require surgeries. So
Yep. There's pediatrics, there's optometry, there's dental, there's a whole slew of things. So if you ever get curious about the Air Force medical stuff, then if you Google like the 4, anything that begins with a 4 is a medical career field. So there's so much. There's dietitians, there's physical therapy. It's just a whole slew. For everything that there's an officer for, there is a enlisted member for. Yeah. So it's very, very, I would say the medical field, especially Air Force, is very different. Very different. Because a lot of them specialists or medical technicians work with officers. And normally throughout people's careers, you don't really deal a lot with officers unless you're getting praised or in trouble, right? Or spoken at instead of
Yeah.
to, right? So those are the differences. So we have a little bit of a different dynamic in the medical field than typically a maintenance person would.
Right. Do you think that having that kind of medical field in the Air Force encouraged you to join the Air Force more?
It definitely was a different incentive for me. I knew I didn't like to do manual labor.
Yeah.
I did a factory job before in between school and Air Force, and I was like, I do not like this. I do not like this at all. But I naturally like to help people,
Yeah.
just depending on that capacity. And I was like, oh, well, if I do something medical, then when I get out, because again, I was only going to do 4 years, 6 years, I'll still have something that I can transition into civilian sector.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to be an X-ray technician. And for whatever reason, that job wasn't open or something to that nature. And I was like, well, I just need to get out of here.
Yeah.
So what's next? So
Sure.
yep, yeah. So it's definitely different, and plus all the benefits that you get, like you get tuition assistance, you get housing allowance, you get so many different. And if you're a flyer, you get flight incentives. There's so many different things that you get to do
Yeah.
that average medical people in civilian sectors don't necessarily get to do. So it definitely has a little plus. Plus, you have the discipline, right? There's a different type of
Right.
discipline that goes with it. Yeah. So you
Yeah.
still are a doctor, but you're still required to do PT, and you're still required to be a mentor, and you're still required to be a peer, and then you have to do peer reviews, and then you have to write OPRs and EPRs. So there's still, and then after all the Air Force has told you to do, then you're a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Then you're an orthopedic doctor. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
different. I would say it's probably a little bit more strenuous
The
for the
benefits
doctors.
from the military in general are just insane, even from the
Mhm.
child's perspective, because I'm going to school for free. Like,
Mhm.
we have all these benefits because dad was in the army. And,
Mhm.
even though most of them are because he got hurt, like, we still
Right.
have all these benefits that we're able to, use and, you know,
Absolutely. Take
yeah.
advantage of it for sure,
Yes.
especially, you know, I knowing what your dad has gone through and then hearing what you want to do, it's almost like they're like hand in hand connected, like, oh, you've seen all these wonderful work
Yeah.
and doctors and different medical specialists that have helped your father on his way through recovery, that it's almost like you're, without even knowing it, you innately just want to do it as well.
Exactly. And I think, I had looked at so many different things like physical therapy and, he did a lot of physical therapy and,
Absolutely.
part of his physical therapy was running, and I would always
Mhm.
get up and run with him in the summers. So I had experienced that and, in a sense, taken part in that. So
Mhm.
I had looked into that, and then I got bored thinking about it. So I moved on to athletic training because I was like, well, it connects my love for sports and,
Mhm.
you know, medical, and being around the medical field for so long, I had just been, drawn towards it. And then, yeah, I want to get my doctorate in something. So orthopedics and
That's
sports
awesome.
medicine would be,
Fingers crossed. Keep going. Keep going.
yes,
When
for
you
sure.
got anything left, keep going.
Yes, for sure. So, one last question for you. What advice would you have to another military child or someone looking to join the military or something along those lines?
So can you repeat that one more time?
What advice would you give to
Oh,
like another
advice.
military
Okay.
child or someone joining the military along those lines?
Mhm. Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. You never know if it's not for you if you never try. Do
Right.
it. 100% do it. And don't do it kind of, do it all the way. Like, it's 2 years flew by, 4 years flew by, 6 years flew by. Like, I would say the longest assignment was 17 months in North Dakota. Everything else was
Right.
even being down here. I've been down here since December, but it still feels like, oh my gosh, this is all happening super fast. I would say do it. Like, and if you don't like what you're doing in the Air Force, especially, you can always cross train and do something else. And we have so many tremendous programs as far as commissioning, flying programs. Like, there's so many things that you can do, and it just opens your world up a little bit more. Even if you don't make a career out of it, you still have so much more background knowledge than the normal citizen does. Like,
Sure.
there's just so many more opportunities that you have without even looking for it. And then the networking that you get to do and see is outstanding. I can't tell you how many like people that I've met that do so many cool things. I'm like, whoa. I can't keep up. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing the opportunities that you get. I would say do it. Do it. You don't know what you don't know. That's it. You got to do it.
That's really
Go to
good
Air Force
advice.
though. You don't do any other branch. The Air Force is the best one.
Yeah, I'm sure Zelina is very fond of that too.
Yeah. I'm an advocate for the big blue.
Yes. Well, thank you for being on the podcast and sharing your stories.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I admire what you're doing. I think it's amazing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Grace of a Military Child podcast. If you enjoyed listening, please like, subscribe, comment, share, and review. You can also follow us at Grace of a Military Child podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for more content related to the podcast. If you or someone you know is a military child that would like to be featured on an episode of the podcast, please send a message to one of our social media platforms or send us an email to grace.of.a.military.child@gmail.com. Thank you, and join back next week for another inspiring story.